Okay, welcome to week number one of the new, I think this is maybe sixth or seventh cycle on chat, on Zoom, I should say. We've been doing this on Sunday evening, live and then on Zoom for now, I think about 14 years, and continuing to go strong. Thank you all for being part of this and continuing all of these months and years. Um, so welcome to the new cycle, and we continue. We are going to be, like I said, I didn't send out the emails, and it's an abundance of material that you'll see during the meeting. Andy's going to post it in the chat so you can grab it and make a copy, get a PDF and print it. But I will also be sending it out during the week. If you don't have it by, say, Thursday, then send me an email and ask where is it, because I'm going to try and get them all sent out. Everything you see in the chat will be sent. Don't worry, just give it a little bit of time. Okay, we are beginning a new cycle, and before starting on this journey, each time we do that, I thought it's of some value to pose and also answer a couple of questions, a few things that you may be wondering about, especially if you're here for the first time. First, why? Why work the steps? Why work them? Why study them? Why not don't drink and go to meetings? Right? You'll have people telling you that. Don't worry, don't rush, just go to meetings and that's all you have to do. Well, what I like to do is turn to Bill. What did Bill say about that? Or what would he have said if he were here today to answer that question? And so I go into our material and I look for the answers. And in answer to that question, I go to the 12 and 12. In the 12 and 12, on page 39, Bill says the following: sobriety brought about by the admission of alcoholism, step one, and by attendance at a few meetings, step two. It's very good indeed, but it's bound to be a far cry from permanent sobriety and a contented, useful life. That's just where the remaining steps of the program come in. Steps 3 through 12. That's the key to permanent sobriety and a contented, useful life, not just steps 1 and 2. Nothing short of continuous action upon these as a way of life, meaning it's ongoing, it's constant, it never ends, can bring about the much desired result. And the much desired result is revealed in the first part of the 12th step, where it says that we've had a spiritual awakening, a change in personality sufficient to recover from this hopeless state of mind and body. And it happened as a result of working these 12 steps, not just 1 and 2, not just going to a couple of meetings, 12 steps. And and also in the 12 and 12 on page 174, Bill throws this caveat in that unless each AA member follows to the best of his ability our suggested 12 steps to recovery, he almost certainly signs his own death warrant. Let me repeat that.
Sorry, Howard, I muted by accident. I was trying to let someone in.
Is that your way of telling me something, Dell, or what? Unless each member follows to the best of his ability our suggested 12 steps to recovery, he almost certainly signs his own death warrant. His drunkenness and disillusion, in other words, relapses. His relapses or his being restless, irritable, and discontented. We relapse in different ways. It's not always a rage of drinking. It could be a rage of anger. It could be eating. It could be gambling. It could be any number of things. Uh, but the end of that, our drunkenness and dissolution result from our personal disobedience to spiritual principles. In other words, from not working the steps. And once again, in the 12 and 12, Bill tells us that the steps we took are suggested as the program of recovery. The program of recovery, not one of many, the. And again, in the foreword to the 12 and 12, Bill tells us that AA's 12 steps are a group of principles, spiritual in their nature, which you've practiced as a way of life. Second reference in another publication that the steps are not a one and done. The steps are a way of life. Can expel the obsession to drink and enable the sufferer to become happily and usefully whole. That's what Bill had to say about why we work the steps. So what's the point then of going to meetings? If the whole thing is about having had a spiritual awakening as a result of the steps, and you do that by working those 12 steps, why bother even going to a meeting? Andy, why don't you put up the welcome sheet and folks can follow along as we do this? Um, Maybe it's easier if we could see it. Um, so, what's the point of going to meetings? In problems other than alcohol, it's IP number 35, which is probably my least favorite of our many IPs, probably the most misunderstood IP that we have. Um, it says, Bill states that sobriety, freedom from alcohol, Andy, you got to move that up a bit. Freedom from alcohol through the teaching and practice of the 12 steps is the sole purpose of an AA group. So why go to meetings? Because that's the only way you're going to get access to teaching and practice of the 12 steps. And so Bill tells us it's the sole purpose of a meeting. So ask yourself, and I don't mean to be divisive here, but the last discussion meeting you went to, what was their sole purpose? What seemed to be their purpose? Were they aiming at teaching and practicing the 12 steps, or was it about the ongoing adventures of Aunt Fanny and Uncle Fudd? And tomorrow we'll come back and hear the next episode of Fanny and Fudd and their problems with the neighbors and the washing machine and the dogs and so on. That's not the purpose of going to meetings. That's not the purpose of this at all. Um, and he further amplifies that point in As Bill Sees It, where he says, our chief responsibility to the newcomer is an adequate presentation of the program, the steps. So again, that last group discussion meeting you went to, did they fulfill their responsibility? Did they adequately present the program? That's the purpose of the meetings. Okay, so that being the case, why not work out of the 12 and 12, right? We have a big, fat, big book and we have a teeny little 12 and 12. Why not just work out of that? Well, in the foreword to the 12 and 12, Bill explains the differences between those two books. He says that the book, Alcoholics Anonymous, became the basic text. It's not a work of fiction or nonfiction text, which means we learn from it. It teaches us something. That's what textbooks do. It's the basic text of our fellowship, and it still is. This present volume, meaning the 12 and 12, proposes to broaden and deepen the understanding of the 12 steps as was first written in the earlier work. So that's why we use the big book and not the 12 and 12. Why then do we do this? Why do we get together in these groups and go through the book and nitpick and be pedantic about every little thing? Why do we study this book? Why do we do that? Well, in order to answer that, we had to go to a different source, the Little Red Book. Many of you may be familiar with it. The actual title is The Unorthodox Interpretation of the 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous by Edward A. Webster, with edits and comments, I might add, from Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob didn't do any writing, but he was involved with the editing of the Red Book, the Little Red Book, and it's a great book. If you haven't picked it up, you should. It's a book which is considered to be the very first step walking supplement to the Big Book. It came out shortly after the Big Book did, and it's really meant to accompany the study of the Big Book. And in it, Webster says, for those who are willing to accept the AA program as a means of recovery from alcoholism, we recommend a close study. Let me repeat that, a close study of Alcoholics Anonymous. Study it repeatedly, Alcoholics Anonymous, this book has all our answers. And in the author's notes for that book, he says, worthwhile results have followed the inauguration of weekly classes devoted to guidance of new members in their quest for a better understanding of the 12 steps as a way of life. Once again, a reference to an ongoing way of life from alcoholism. These classes have created a solidarity of understanding within our fellowship. They brought a closer adherence to the big book, better understanding and application of its philosophy, more effective sponsorship, and a much higher ratio of sobriety among our members. That's our greatest challenge. I believe our greatest challenge in recovery today is lack of adequately trained, trained sponsors. We got a lot of people going around as sponsor, and their main qualification is they've somehow managed to stay sober for a year. How many times you go to a meeting where they say, anyone with a year or more, raise your hand, and if you need a sponsor, ask one of those people. And they always wonder what happens on the 365th day of the year that instantly makes them okay to trust them with my life in their hands. I don't think that that's what it's all about. So, Andy, you can take that down. So, having cleared the ground a little bit, and we begin this quest for spiritual awakening, we're going to be studying the big book, but just to review, Andy, if you'll put up the number 1A, just to review the purposes of the what we are doing here now. What is the purpose of the Big Book Comes Alive workshop? Number one, the first purpose, as I mentioned already, to develop a better understanding and application of the program of recovery, the 12 steps from alcoholism found in this book. Number two, to clear up the myths and misconceptions that exist. Nonsense like you don't have to rush to work on the steps. Take your time. This is not a race. Don't drink and go to meetings, and that's all you have to do. And that's not what you have to do. So we're going to be clearing up all of those myths and misconceptions that exist about our program, about our steps, about our history as well. We're going to do some of that today. And number three, it's to produce a higher ratio of sobriety among our members. The more we work the steps, the greater our sobriety percentages are. And last but not least, to empower members to more effective sponsorship so that the qualification is not just, I've managed to get through 12 months without a drink or a drug. There's got to be more to it than that. We'll see how the first step tells us that we don't have a problem with alcohol in the first part of the step, but it also tells us, I'm sorry, it tells us we do no longer have a problem with alcohol. Our problem is sobriety. We have a problem with sobriety, and that's what the second part of the first step tells us. And working the steps will take care of that. Okay, so let's take a look at what is some guidelines of not guidelines, some history. A lot of people know about the roots of AA being started in the Oxford group, which doesn't exist anymore, at least under that name. But they've heard the Oxford group, and a lot of people may not even be comfortable asking about it. But what is this all about? Well, the Oxford Group was a Christian fellowship that existed in the 20s and 30s, and here's a little bit of history about that. Andy, if you put that up, and for some of you, this may be new news. You may not have heard about this part of the Oxford Group because I went a little bit deeper. I went beyond when Bill Wilson hooked up with them. What was the Oxford Group before that? How did it come about? Andy, you got the what is it? The pre-AK pre AA beginnings, 1B, I believe it is. There we go. Pre-Akron beginnings of Alcoholics Anonymous, because we know that that's where it got kicked off as in Akron. Let's go to the next page. In 1902, a gentleman by the name of Robert Speer wrote a book called The Principles of Jesus, applied to some questions today, in which he stated that Jesus taught that he termed what he termed the four standards, that Jesus taught four standards is the term that was used then, not absolutes, but standards. And in the book, The Principles of Jesus, amplified to some, applied to some questions, he talks about what those standards are, were purity, honesty, unselfishness, and love. And if you're familiar with the Oxford group, you know that that was their drive, that was their goal. Andy, if you can fit in that next page, that missing page, do you have that one? If you don't, it's okay. This isn't Andy's fault. I got this stuff to him real late. So again, the Oxford groups worked on the principles of to achieve their absolutes of purity, honesty, unselfishness, and love. They believed you had to practice certain spiritual principles. And before the Oxford group was set up, this guy Robert Speer wrote in Principles of Jesus. If you've got that booklet somewhere on page 33 to 36, it says that Jesus set up an absolute standard of truth, an absolute standard of unselfishness, an absolute standard of purity, and an absolute standard of love. All of the things that the Oxford groups was trying to achieve: absolute purity, absolute honesty, absolute unselfishness, and absolute love. Andy, if you'll go back to the other one. Um, so in 1909, Spears was a teacher who wrote the stuff we just talked about. His student, Henry Wright, writes a book that's called The Will of God in a Man's Life Work, in which he referred to the earlier work and coined the term the absolutes. He took what his teacher said about those four standards and he called them absolutes. And in the will of God in the man's life work, which is pictured there on the right and in the center, he referred to the earlier work and he coined that term and he called it absolute purity, absolute honesty, absolute unselfishness, absolute love. He further suggested if we surrender self to the protection and care of God and follow the dictates of a higher power, we'll live in a new and wonderful world no matter what our current circumstances. Does that sound familiar? You'll find it in the big book on page 100. And what is the tie-in between Speer and this guy Wright? Well, Wright was Speer's student, and guess who was a student of Henry Wright? Frank Buchman. Frank Buchman was the founder. Actually, it's pronounced Bookman, spelled Buchman, Buchman, but it's pronounced Bookman. And he was the founder of the Oxford groups. Let's go on to the next page, if you don't mind, Andy. In 1909, Buchman had a profound spiritual experience in which he said, I saw my resentment standing out like tombstones in my heart. I asked God to change me, and he told me to put things right with those I'd wronged. Sounds like restitutions and inventory, huh? And that produced in me a vibrant feeling as though a strong current of life had been poured into me and left in me a dazed sense of having had a great spiritual shaking up. Sounds like having had a spiritual awakening as a result of doing that work. In 1922, he started a ministry that was originally called the First Century Christian Fellowship. That eventually became known as the Oxford Group because it was formed in Oxford in the UK. And the Oxford groupers believed that you could strive for absolute purity, absolute honesty, absolute unselfishness, and absolute love through the practice of the tenets of, and here are the activities: surrender to God. See if this doesn't sound like our steps. Surrender to God. Listen for God's directions. Restitution for wrongs, direct or indirect. Confession and sharing of one's sins and temptations. Now, why do we not think of and credit Frank Bookman as being a founder of AA? Well, Frank believed that his philosophies can be applied worldwide. So in the late mid 30s, he went on a trip to Europe and visited the heads of state of the various countries that were on the verge of war, because we were about to enter into World War II. And he spoke to them, and among the leaders there, he went to see Adolf Hitler. Hitler didn't see him, but Albert Speer and Joseph Goebbels did. And when he came back, he was quoted in a New York paper as saying, I thank heaven for a man like Adolf Hitler, who built the front line of defense against the anti-communism of communism. And that, my friends, was the end of the Oxford Group. They imploded. The last thing you needed was an organization promoting or agreeing with Adolf Hitler in the late 30s and in New York on top of it all. So that was pretty much the final bullet in the gun that ended the Oxford group as they were known as the Oxford groups. Now let's go back a little further. Andy, in early 1916, a minister, a protege of Ox Buckman's, a man by the name of Sam Shoemaker. Sound familiar to anybody here? Sam Shoemaker was a mentor of Bill's. Sam Shoemaker was very much responsible for the wording of our 12 steps. Sam Shoemaker was feeling spiritually lost. He was feeling inadequate, unfulfilled, and disconnected. And while on a mission in China with Bookman, Bookman advised him to, quote, look within himself in terms of purity, honesty, unselfishness, and love, the equivalent of telling him to take today's inventory. He told him take a moral inventory. Shoemaker does so and said, my sins rose before me like tombstones, and it resulted in him having a profound spiritual experience. His transformation was so strong that he became the leader of the Oxford groups in 1924. He established their world headquarters in New York's Calvary Mission, located at 61 Gramercy Park off of 23rd Street in Manhattan. And he was the big guy, the big kahuna of the Oxford groups in New York. Now, at the same time this stuff was going on, a wealthy industrialist and an alcoholic by the name of Roland Hazard returns from treatment in Switzerland, where he went to, he was seeing Dr. Carl Jung. And from Jung, he got directions to find a solution, a spiritual solution, as the only path of recovery for him through alcoholism. He tried everything else, spoke to God knows how many other psychiatrists, and he found the answer through Dr. Jung, who told him, find a spiritual direction. Now, since the Hazard family was a major financial contributor to the Calvary Mission Church, that's where he went. When he was looking for a spiritual solution, he went to the church that his family supported. The family, incidentally, the Hazard family was at that time the richest family in the country, in the United States. Collectively, their wealth was greater than any other family in the country. And since they were a contributor there, he started there. He eventually dedicated the Hazard family property in North Bennington, Vermont, into a sort of drying out farm for alcoholics. That's where Ebby Thatcher went to dry out. And when he was involved with the Oxford groups, they practiced the Oxford groups soul surgery. Andy, if you can give me the next page for a minute. Soul surgery, their activities. How do you achieve absolute purity, absolute unselfishness, absolute love, and so on? You do it through the practice of the 5 C's: confidence, confession, conviction, conversion, continuance. Confidence in God to restore you to sanity. Sounds like step 2. Confession of shortcomings. Sounds like step 5. Conviction to turn away from one's failings. Sounds like probably 8 and 10. Conversion, spiritual awakening, and continuance, passing it on to others. Now, the significance of that is that Roland Hazard did manage to get sober briefly by doing these things. And Andy, if you'll go back one page to what we were just talking about, Um, he rescued Roland Ebby Thatcher from court, who was about to be sentenced for alcoholic insanity. That meant he would go to Lawton Hall, an insane asylum in Brattleboro, Vermont, for an indeterminate period of time. And mysteriously, Roland Hazard and a few other members of the Oxford groups at the time happened to be in court the day that Ebby was about to be sentenced. And he told the judge, give him to us. Don't send him away to the nut house for an indeterminate period of time. He pointed out to the judge, whose name was Collins Graves, that his son, Sebra Graves, was in the process of recovering at that very minute from alcoholism through the teachings of the Oxford group. So he said to the judge, give him to me. Let us do with him what we did with your son. And the judge gave Ebby Thatcher, and I'm sure you all know who Ebby was. It mandated him to Ebby. Ebby went with Hazard to their home, which I mentioned before. He later contributed to the Oxford groups, and he got sober. And he got sober, and if you turn the page, Andy, there we go. In the fall of 1934, Ebby, who had taken up residence at the Calvary Mission, starts to think about his prep school drinking buddy, Bill Wilson. And he hears he currently is drinking himself to death in Brooklyn. So he decides to pay a call on made arrangements for Ebby to come to dinner. He called Bill. They made arrangements for him to come to dinner. And Bill is immediately taken with Ebby's appearance. There he stood, fresh-skinned and glowing. There was something about his eyes. He was inexplicably different. And for the rest of the story, we all know, and we will be coming across in the next few months, more will be revealed. So there's some background into how we got to where we are. And since we're supposed to be talking about the big book today, let's at least do some of that before we go home for the evening. If you open the book to the first page, please open it to the first page. And I'm going to ask that you hold it up to the screen. Let me see what your first page looks like. Well, hopefully it looks like this because it's blank. The first page of my book is blank. It's empty. And that is basically the sum total of my knowledge about this book every time I undertake a reading of it. Every time I start a workshop, every time I enter a workshop, anytime I just pick it up and start to read, this is the sum total of my knowledge about the book. Remember that set aside prayer I read in the beginning? That is this. This is a graphic example of the set aside prayer. And I'm going to ask that you not write out the set aside prayer on these pages or tape it into these pages because it should remain blank so that you can show this to your sponsees when you go through it, that it should remain blank. You can have the set aside prayer folded up here, but please try and leave this page blank because that really is a reminder of how little I know about the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous every time I read it. Andy, if you would, let's go to the title page. I think that's number 3 in the screen shares. Okay, this is the title page. Even in the UK, it looks something like this, although here in the 4th edition, which most of us have, there is no legacy circle and triangle in the middle. In the UK, you guys still have that. But here, we don't. It was lost as a use of a symbol in 1993 because we decided not to engage in a lengthy legal argument to try and get control of what we believe is our symbol, because it's an outside issue. Legal matters are not things that AA gets engaged in. So we walked away from it, and other people use it as well. But we still use it in our coins and so on, but it's not in the book anymore. And what I'm referring to is this circle and a triangle. And we're going to come back to this page in a minute. But Andy, if you could give me, if you don't mind, the three legacies number 4, because I'm going to ask that you write in that space on that page, in the center of the title page, under where it says fourth edition, I'm going to ask that you put this in there. Draw a circle and an equilateral triangle in the center of it. An equilateral just means all three sides are the same. One side isn't any stronger or longer than any other side. And there are three sides to the triangle of Alcoholics Anonymous. And as I mentioned, and what we're going to be doing here is we're focusing on one part of it, the bottom part of the triangle, which are the steps, recovery. So on the bottom of that triangle, please write steps, recovery, and where you'll find it on page 59 and page 60 of the big book. And then as you go around clockwise to the left, you'll see unity. And we find unity through the practice of our traditions, which you'll find on 563 to 566 of the big book. Continuing clockwise, moving again to the right, we'll find our concepts. This is how we learn about service to Alcoholics Anonymous and to everything and everyone else. And we'll find that on page 574 to 575. In this workshop, we are not going to be talking about unity or service unless it's relevant to what we're dealing with out of the book. We are going to be focusing on that last bottom part of the triangle, the steps. And if you remove that line from the triangle, you know what happens to the triangle? It collapses. It can't stand on two legs like that. It will fall apart unless it has the bottom part attached firmly, which means we need to get straight with our steps before we get involved in service, before we get involved in traditions. This is how we learn to function in our society. And Andy, if you'll go back to the previous page, let's take a look at that title page. Okay. The book begins with a promise. It's what people refer to as the subtitle of the book. And that subtitle is the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered ED, we'll come back to that in a minute, from alcoholism. That's the first promise in the book. And it doesn't come arbitrarily, it comes in the title. Subtitle means it is part of the title. So the title of our book is not just Alcoholics Anonymous. The title of our book is Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. That's the full title. That's promise number 1. It tells us the chain of events. That's when we say the story, it's the chain of events and the manner in which thousands of men and women have recovered ED from alcoholism. So right away on the first page, we're debunking one of the myths in AA is that you never use the word recovered. This is a 24-hour a day, one day at a time program. We never say we're permanently recovered. We never say that we are recovered. We're supposed to say we're recovering. Well, the book tells me otherwise. The book has lots of references to recovered. And so what we're going to do in the workshop here is we're going to highlight it specifically in pink. We have a couple of different colors. Andy, if you want to just quickly throw this up for a second. Number 7, the highlighted key, which will appear in the chat over and over throughout these weeks. In order to identify certain things as we go through the book, we color code them. If you want to find all of the promises in the book, you'll just thumb through it and look for all of the highlights in pink. If you look at the picture behind Serene Francine and some of the other people who are doing service here, you'll see what we mean, that the picture has highlights in different colors. Pink is for prayers and promises. Green highlighter is for musts. For those people who say there are no musts in AA, there's a shitload of them, and we're going to highlight them all in green so that if any time you have to point out to people that there are a lot of musts, you just thumb through the book and you'll see all of the green references as you go through it. The next one is blue for approached. Somehow in today's culture, it became acceptable to take the position of being available to the newcomer. Well, the book tells me otherwise. The book tells me it's not my job to be available. It is my job to approach the person who's new, the person who's struggling, the person who is just coming into us for the first time and is scared of everything. Those people who are here today for the first time and are thinking, what the hell is this shit all about? We are here for you. It is our job to approach you. And so in the book, whenever we make reference to the approaches, we highlight it in blue. And I think as of now, we got about, I think it's about 40 approach references. And for those of you who say there are no musts, we got about 140 of them. We have a list that we've been keeping together. If anyone wants copies of those, just send a request to the big book study at AOL.com, which is here, and you'll see it in the chat. And just ask for the list of musts and the list from approach references and a list for recovered references and so on. And orange is for recovered references. Anytime we come across a recovered reference, whether it's recovered or permanently recovered, which is another term you're going to come across once in a while, and people are going to say, oh, no, 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 we never say that. Well, the book says otherwise. You can achieve permanent sobriety one day at a time through the practice of our 12 principles, in particular 10, 11, and 12. And then everything else is highlighted in yellow or any other color you want to choose. I just ran out of colors, so I used yellow. So that's just a way to identify things as we float through it in the book. And Andy, if you'll come back to the title page for me, title page, I guess that's number 3. There we go. So we've got the legacies in the center. The three, like that little drawing, the circle with the triangle, is known as the legacies of AA. And if you look up legacies, and we do, if you're here starting with us, you should probably get 2 dictionaries. One is a current dictionary, and one, look around. You'll find it at church book sales, at maybe on eBay and so on, to get a dictionary from the 30s, because we're reading a book that was written in the 30s. So it's going to be helpful to know, what did that word mean when it was written? Because you're going to be shocked at some of the things that have changed their meaning over the years. So it's nice to know what we interpret that word to mean and then what it meant back then. So have those two dictionaries with you. But if you look up the word legacy, and that's why I mentioned the dictionary, you'll find it's defined as something that's handed down from one generation to the other. And what is handed down from one generation to the other, what we have in Alcoholics Anonymous, that's so precious to us that we guard it with our lives and we pass it on to the next generation, just like it was passed on to us from the generations before us. Those legacies are service, recovery, and unity. And that's why we draw attention to it. That's why we always pay respect to it. Now, if I go back to the top where it said the story of how many thousands of men and women, that's highlighted in pink because it's a promise. As I said, we're going to highlight all the promises in pink. It also contains the word recovered. So you may want to circle the word recovered in orange highlight, because there's another word that we're going to be drawing attention to, is recovered. And even this is a 4th edition. When the first edition came out in 1939, it didn't say how many thousands of men and women have recovered. In the first edition, the first printing, it said how 100 men have recovered from alcoholism. The story of how 100 men have recovered from alcoholism. In the second printing, a year and change later, in 1941, it was changed to how 2,000 men and women have recovered. By the third printing, it was changed to how 6,000 men and women have recovered. And in the fourth edition, which is what you're looking at here, and in the sixth edition, I'm sorry, in the fifth printing and the sixth printing, that was changed to 10,000 men and women. And now in the ninth printing, also from this, in the first edition, it said how many thousands of men and women have recovered. So it's changed over the years, and that's one of the few things that has changed as we go through this book. You'll notice nothing is easily changed. So there's our title page. It gives us the states what this book is all about. It's a gives us the manner in which it was achieved. And let's go, Andy, if you would, to the table of contents, number 5. Did I lose Andy? Oops, you lost Andy.
Said
I'm
number
getting these two
seven.
fives. Sorry.
Okay, Andy, you there? Do I need to co-host you? Oh, there you go. Thank you. Okay, let's turn to the page that looks like this. And we call it the contents because it tells us what's in this book. And I'm going to ask that you draw some lines across the page. Under where it says forward to the fourth edition, let's draw one of those lines across the page. And underneath that, under where it says Bill's story, let's draw a line across the page there. Under Bill's story, all the way across the page to the other side. And then we're going to go down to We Agnostics. And under We Agnostics, we're going to put another line across the page, all the way to the right-hand side. And then under that, under Working with Others, we're going to put another line across the page from left to right or right to left. Doesn't really matter at this stage whether you want to take the Hebrew approach or the English approach, right to left, left to right. It's no big deal for now. So we make that line under Working with Others. And then under that, under where it says the family afterwards, we're going to draw another line. Under To Employers, yet another line. And then under number 11, A Vision for You, another line. And now I'm going to suggest you fill those things in. Let's go back to the top. The first section where it says forward to the second edition, I'm going to ask that you write the words Our History, because that's what you're going to find in the forward to the second edition. The forward to the second edition contains our history. We begin the book with that study. And if you look down at the bottom in chapter 11, A Vision for You, we're going to conclude our study with history. History is important. It's vital. We are going to learn a lot about history here. I love our history. I'm fascinated by our history. I hope you're not bored by this stuff. I'll try and keep it to a minimum, but if it's important, it needs to be passed along. So we begin with history, and we will several months down the line be ending with history. And then we have another line under Bill's story, and we're going to put a little bracket there. We're going to bracket in the doctor's opinion and Bill's story. And on the right side of that bracket, we're going to write what's in those two chapters, and that is the definition of the problem. It's going to tell us about step 1. That's what doctor's opinion and Bill's story, that's the message it carries to us. And then we have chapters 2, 3, and 4, and we're going to bracket all 3 of those. And on the top line, for there is a solution, we're going to write pages 17 through 25, step 1. That's what you'll find in 25, 17 to 25, is it tells us about step one. See, this book doesn't say chapter one is step one, chapter two is step two, etc. It's in the chapters. It requires careful reading, it requires study. So when you're reading, there is a solution between pages 17 and 25. You're going to read about and learn about step one. And then as we continue on page 25 to 29, we go into step two. And then right after that, on page 30, we begin the solution, which is step two. So chapters two, three, and four are about chapters one, two, and three. And then we bracket the next three, how it works into action and working with others, chapters five, six, and seven. We're going to bracket that and we're going to describe that as the program of action, because that's what we'll find in those chapters. In how it works, we're going to talk about steps three and four. So that's what we've written over here on the right side. If you want to write it on the left next to the chapter name, go right ahead. Doesn't matter. But how it works covers steps three and four. Into action covers steps 5 through 11. Boy, there's a lot of meat on that bone. And then under next to how it under working with others, we're going to write on the right side step 12, part 2, because you see, step 12 is a three-part step: a promise, a charge, and a challenge. The second part is the charge. What are we charged with? Well, as a result of the 12, working the first 11 and a half steps, we've had a spiritual awakening. And nothing in this life is free. So we're being charged. In the first part of the 12th step, we're being handed a bill. We're being told that this is the price you have to pay. That's the second part of the 12th step, which is the charge. And then two wives and the family afterwards is about step 12, part 3, which is practicing these principles in all of our affairs. Then to employers gets back to teaching us about step 12, second part, helping others. And chapter 11, A Vision for You, finishes with our history once again. So where, you may ask, is the first part of step 12 found? If the second part of step 12 is in working with others, and the third part is within two wives to our family others, where do we find step 1? Well, at the bottom of the page, you may want to write step 12, part 1 is covered in the doctor's opinion and in chapters 1 through 6. In other words, from page 1 through 164. That's how we learn about the first part of the 12th step. You want to have a spiritual awakening? Read and what it says to do, what they've done on pages 1 through 164. That's where you'll find it. And since we have some other stories, let's identify some of these personal stories. The first story on that same page, the table of contents, the first story is Dr. Bob's Nightmare. That's Dr. Bob Smith. That's our co-founder. So you may want to write next to his name, Dr. Smith, next to Dr. Bob's Nightmare, write Bob Smith. If we turn the page, this is now page VI. It starts with Alcoholics Anonymous number 3. You're going to highlight that and write the name Bill Dotson, Dotson. That's Bill Dotson's story, is on page VI, which is Roman numeral 6. Story number 1, Alcoholics Anonymous number 3. That's Bill Dotson. It was actually written by Bill Wilson, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. It's one of those myths that we're going to be talking about. Who wrote that chapter? Not Bill Dotson, Bill Wilson. Let's go to a couple of other stories. The third chapter is called Women Suffer Too. Next to that, let's write Ms. Marty Mann, Martymann. That story was not in the first edition, but that's Marty Mann's story, the first successful woman to achieve sobriety in Alcoholics Anonymous, Ms. Marty Mann. Then number four is our Southern friend, and that man's name is Fitz, F-I-T-Z Mayo. You want the whole name? His real name is John Henry Fitzhugh Mayo. Man, they had some extraordinary handles back in those days. John Henry Fitzhugh Mayo. My God. But that's his story, and I tell you it because we're going to be talking about Fitz Mayo a lot throughout this workshop. So you may want to read his story. Who else do we got here that's of significance that I want to pass along to you? If you go to page VIII on chapter 16, acceptance was the answer. Next to that, let's write the gentleman's name who was that person who wrote that. His name was Dr. Paul Olinger, Ohlinger. That chapter was originally called Dr. Addict Alcoholics. I'm sure you could figure out why they changed that name for those pedantic people out here. They did not want that addict word appearing in the book. So they changed that name. And that's a story that we will also be talking about a lot as we go through this book. And one of the other ones I want to draw your attention to is on page X, Roman numeral 10, story number 14, Freedom from Bondage. Freedom from Bondage is a story of Wynn, W-Y-N-N, Corum, C-O-R-U-M, Laws, L-A-W-S. We are going to be talking about her story quite a bit, especially when we get into the fourth step, but we'll be talking about her quite a bit. So you may want to jump ahead and read those stories before we get together next week, because it just gives you some understanding. And I'll give you a kind of a tip. If you look at page XII, which is the preface to the fourth edition, I'm jumping ahead. I know because we're running out of time, but we're running out of time. We're going to be jumping ahead in this regard. It says at the bottom of that page, the last paragraph, which begins with all changes made. If you go down about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down, you'll see a sentence that begins with, if you have a drinking problem. So highlight it, if you would, in yellow, all the way through, starting with if you have a drinking problem, all the way through to the end of the page where it says, this program can work for me too. Please highlight all of that. That's Miley, incidentally. You'll be learning and hearing a lot about her over the next few months. Excuse me, Miley, that's Mom's sweater. Okay. But if we read it, it says, if you have a drinking problem, underline that and put the number 1. There's number 1. If you're qualifying as having a drinking problem, then you can continue to read further. And it says, we hope that you may pause in reading one of the stories. That's number 2. We're giving you assignment. Pause in reading one of 42 personal stories and think, yes, that happened to me.
No.
Or more important, yes, I felt like that, and I made a mistake, incidentally. I said pause in reading. That's not number 2. Number 2 is, yes, that happened to me. Number 3 is, yes, I felt like that. And number 4 is, yes, I believe this program can work for me too. So what we're saying is, here's the first assignment in the book. Here's the first call to action. It's asking us, number 1, do you have a drinking problem? Number 2, did that happen to me? As I read these stories, do I identify with that? Did that happen to me? Put a little check mark next to each point in the story that does ring a bell for you. Third question it addresses is, did I feel like that? As I read through these people's stories, do I say, yeah, That happened to me. I know exactly what that was like. And number four, do I believe this can work for me too? This thing that they're talking about in their story. Do I believe? Do I hope? Because that's what belief is hope. It's not faith. It's not knowledge. It's not certainty. It's hope. So as I read these stories and I look at them and say, did that happen to me? Did I feel like that? And if those two are answered yes, then so should the last question, which is, do I believe, do I hope that can happen for me too? So for next week, there's the first assignment is pick any one of the 40 some odd stories at the back of the book. I'm going to suggest the ones we just identified. Pick those. Those are the most important, I think, because we're going to be referring back to them. But for this stage of the study, pick any four stories and ask yourself those questions. I'm going to suggest you stick to those stories. There's more than four, but that's just my suggestion. So that's our assignment for next week is to cover that. So what we've done today, what we've accomplished today is we've gone through the table of contents. We've gone through the title page. We've gone through the three legacies. And I mentioned the set aside prayer, which we said in the beginning. Andy, if you'll put up sheet number 2, please. Every once in a while, I get asked, where did these things come from? Because there's so many, every meeting you go to that has a set aside prayer has a different set aside prayer. However, they all say the same things. And here's where it came from within the book. Some of the statements that are picked out of the book that apply and became the set aside prayer. Maybe we could talk next week about a little bit about who were some of the people responsible for doing that. Mark Houston and uh, I'm sorry, who? Joe. Oh, Joe Hawk. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, Joe Hawk, Mark Houston, some other people that are being given credit. Let's put it that way. Do we know if they're the first people to use it? I don't know. If they're using it, the chances are they got it from somebody else. I think everything we do here is as a result of having heard somebody else do it, and we picked it up. So we're going to learn about that a little bit. But to give you an idea of where those wordings in the set aside prayer came from, here's the source material underneath it. And one last thing, Andy, if you'll give me number 8, or actually before that, hold this image for a moment. We're gonna be working most of the time through the study version of the big book. The study version is the same as the first edition, except it looks like this. You notice there's a blank page every other page. We do a lot of note taking around here. So I'm going to suggest you picked up this book that has the material that we're reading and a place for you to take notes on the material that we're reading. You're going to see it's going to come in handy. And once again, if you look at the background to some of the service team members, Francine and Dell and some of the others, not Andy, because Andy's special. Andy doesn't need to have his logo in the background. But you'll see there's a lot of notes there. We take a lot of notes. Thank God for whiteout and Post-its because even the space for notes is not enough for me. But the study version of the big book is what we're talking about, the study edition.
You can either
Okay.
get it in that's a soft copy or you can get it in the hard copy, which is in black. The last one I bought was on Amazon, but you can buy it through Abe, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
Yeah.
you can buy it on Amazon too. So
Andy, if you'll give me that sheet, how to order the study version, number 8, you can easily get it through Amazon. If you're here in the US, you may want to go through another method, which is going directly to the people who publish this, which is the anonymous press. So if you go to their website, and their website is ANON Press, ANONPRESS.org. If you go to that page, you'll be able to order it directly from them. But in the UK, there are a couple other ways to do that through Amazon, through Abe Books. And I don't know if Abe Books is still around. Some of you may be able to help me with that. But if they're not, there's other ways to find it. I'm going to strongly suggest you pick that up because you'll see very early in this game that we do a lot of note taking. We do a lot of that. So if you want to follow along and make use of that information, get the book that has the blank pages every other page, and you'll be able to do that. And I know I said this before, one last thing. Andy, if you'll give me uh, page 10, suggested readings. Now, once again, all of these things I'm putting up are going to be, there's a link for them in the chat so you can get a copy that way. But I'm going to be sending you emails which contain all of these things. And if you're not on our email list, send me your email address. Send it to thebigbookstudy@aol.com. Don't put it in the chat, please. I won't get it in the chat. Send it directly to Kathy and I at thebigbookstudy@aol.com. We'll get you on the list. We'll send you all of these things all through the months of the workshop. And here's a suggested reading list. As we go through these weeks and months, there are certain things we're going to be referring to over and over again. The Joe and Charlie tapes are a requirement, an absolute must. Our workshops, the 2017 and 18, I think, and 19 and 20 full cycles are on aaspeaker.com. And then after 18 and 19, I think we switched over to recoveryspeakers.com. And then 2 years ago, a year or so ago, we started our own. So if you want to know how to listen to some of the old cycles going back to 2016 and maybe even before, they're all on tape. They're all on the internet, on YouTube, on Spotify, on these specific websites, AA Speaker, recoveryspeakers.com, and now on our own, thebigbookstudy.com. So there's ways to listen to these things. And there's some historical references. I'm going to suggest you look through some of and get some of these books. The most important book of all is Writing the Big Book, The Creation of AA. That is, I believe, the most important piece of history about our society that's ever been written. There's another book that came before it. You'll see it down here, which is Not God, a historical look at AA through Ernest Kurtz, was the best method of history until Writing the Big Book came along. There's three great books on history. One, as I mentioned, the how it worked. I'm sorry, is um, the Bill Shaberg story. Whereas
Writing the big book.
there it is, Writing the Big Book, The Creation of AA. The next one, as I mentioned, was Not God, the story of Alcoholics Anonymous by Ernest Kurtz. And the third most important one is, where is it now? I'm losing my place here. Is Comes of Age. Comes of Age is the one written by Bill about our history. Did I leave it out of this copy? Oh, I'm going to have to redo the copy. Okay. I'm sorry. Comes of Age. It's not titled by Bill Wilson, but Bill wrote it. It's Bill's story of the history of AA, told through the development of the steps, told again through the development of the traditions, and then told again through the development of the concepts. It's a fascinating way to approach this, but Bill has an amazing way to go about things anyway. So look on maybe the next page, Andy. Is it there?
Done a search for it. There's nothing here.
I guess I left it out. That's terrible. I'm gonna have to
Oh,
redo
there we
this
go.
thing. Oh, there it is. Alcoholics Anonymous Comes of Age. That's right, because the full title is Alcoholics Anonymous Comes of Age. It's on the bottom under Bill Wilson's other works. But again, you don't have to pick up all of these right now. We're going to be referring to them for the next few months. So you may want to start picking up some of them and reading these things because they're fascinating. And there's one other one that isn't on the list yet that I will put on the list. And if you'll take that down, is this book, A Mind Power Disease by Bob Anderson. And that may be considered an outside issue to some people. I don't believe it is. It's the story of prime time, which is a movement within Alcoholics Anonymous, which again may be considered an outside issue. I don't care.
It is Alcoholics Anonymous. It's just not literature approved,
Hmm.
approved literature. But since you put up a reading list, I just thought that was a good idea because it gets into this alcoholism before getting into the steps so that you can really have a look at what you're up against. You know,
Hmm.
it's fascinating.
Yeah.
It's changed my recovery. So
It's about alcoholism, not wasm, ism. It's still with us every day. And that second part of the 12th step states that. And we have trouble with sobriety. So pick that one up. And if you have an opportunity to listen to any of Bob Anderson's recordings, you may want to do that. I think we can wrap it at that. Yeah, we're pretty much out of time. I'm going to turn the recording off in case there's any questions.
mm.